it's kind of a step into, you know, with relationships. There's many areas to visit, you know, with intimacy, but I think the thing that drives people to want to explore relationship, generally speaking, is conflict resolution, right? There's conflict. I'm having conflict in my relationship. I want to resolve this thing. And the most significant tool that I've discovered for that, to change the conflict into creativity, is what we're doing. So referring to myself in the face of someone else. Someone else is in extreme uncomfortability or at the height of their own inner conflict, and they've come to you, whether that's because you're the point of their conflict for them, or, you know, some other reason. It's really important for you to continually refer to yourself, because that's what eventually allows emptiness to pervade yourself and then the relationship, which is what creates creativity eventually, is the emptiness. So in a way, it's calling emptiness in from the depths, filling our whole body, and then offering it to the relationship. The other person has a choice, you know, as to how they can respond to that. So you can see when I explain that how we're at the beginnings in this exercise. We're actually doing that. We're tuning into ourselves, watching where's the separation in ourselves, allowing that separation to come together so that emptiness can completely fill ourselves, which brings a state of creativity, and then we're offering that to the relationship.
What if you can't tell if it's yours or theirs?
You just, that's okay. You just notice that you can't tell. And you can keep looking. What does it feel like? How do I know the difference between Sarah and Kelly? Oh, well, if I tune into this thing, I can really tell it's not Daniel's, maybe. Like, it's obvious. It's not Daniel's for whatever reason, because of the inner experience is telling me that. So if I realize, oh, it's not Daniel's, but if I go back to Sarah, does it feel like Sarah's, you know? Or does it feel like mine? Or does it feel like Amy's? Or where does this belong? Is part of the exploration of who am I, right? Like, who am I? Who are they? So you can kind of test your inner environment in the sense of self in relationship to the experience. So I thought it'd be fun to start. We're gonna do a bunch of reflection technique, basically, in lots of different ways. And reflection technique is really the only kind of technique that I feel that I have, and that's good. I have it written out. I can like post it in the thing when we're done, so you don't need to write out all the steps because I have it written. But essentially what it is there's a person in front of you that you're engaging with. And when you perceive that person, you allow yourself to perceive that person with your whole body. So you notice your physical sensation, your emotion, your thoughts that arise when the person is there. Emptiness in relationship to your body, and everything that we've been doing, it's just in relationship to a person. And then as soon as you've taken that person in, you refer back to yourself and notice what's happening in me. What's happening in me, and then you allow any separation to come into unification. And then you look again and notice how am I perceiving the person now? New, fresh. It's not returning to how you did see them, what they once were. It's looking, what are they like now in my awareness and my perception? Where are they? How are they sitting? If this is, this can be with a person who's present or not present, either way. Then you have to be with a real person. Can be your ideal partner, your ideal friend, your ideal coworker, whatever. You notice where they are in space, and you just keep going. It offers us the opportunity to clarify what we are in relationship to the other person and in relationship to emptiness and stillness, and close any gaps between them. In the shamanic traditions, this is recapitulation, basically. So like Carlos Castaneda's teacher and other like women in that tradition would go to their teacher, and their teacher would say, okay, this is how you do the thing. Like you look at each person, you look at the person, and they have a way of breathing, so you breathe in on the left and you breathe out on the right. And you do that until you feel clear on the person. And now you should go and do that. Find a cave and do that until you've hit every person in your life. And then they come back 6 months later. They're like, okay, I hit every person. And then they achieve, there's a state that goes with that. So.
Hit every person?
Well, if you were to do reflection technique on every person you've ever known.
Mm. That's what they do. Like, everyone, not just cool people.
Yeah. Like everyone you've ever known since birth.
Mm-hmm.
What we normally call anger. When there's the potential for suffering. Within that contrast, it's easy to see that there's an I in the anger, and there's a lack of I in the. To me, it's like a dance. Yeah. Anger. This is like super important for women to me, because men I don't really see them dealing with this that much. I mean, they're just in their spiritual path. They're kind of dissociating from all this stuff, and then they look at anger and they go, if you're feeling anger, you're not spiritual. Or you're expressing anger, you're not spiritual. So this is like super important point for me. Like, how do we, in the feminine expression, become fully in the embodiment of anger and express from that without suffering? Well, it's not anger anymore. It doesn't feel as anger. So that's why it's easy for me to say, it's not my anger, it's Flair's anger. Because when I'm sensing it, I'm sensing a tight, closed, it's the complete contrast to the dance of movement and expression that is fueled by what would later become anger if it were contained. So that's how I know that's Flair's, because if I experience the contrast between myself and that, myself being no self, or if there is a self, then I go, okay, it's mine.
So how do you track the difference when it's arising? Like, to know that that's an I versus your I versus...
Well, in the beginning, you look for I. Where's the I? What is the I? It actually doesn't matter whose I you're dealing with. Is there an I? The I is something that contracts and excludes. I'm this thing. I'm this anger, and everything over there, I'm not that thing. It doesn't really matter if that's an I, right? But then there comes a point where it's like, wait a minute, that's not actually really, I don't feel a sense of me there. So what is the flavor of that? And you can begin to feel another flavor in there. For me, I work with people on a daily basis, so I have to tell like the difference between me and them. Is this Karen's eye that's here contracted, or is this my eye? Because if it's my eye, I'm not going to be able to support Karen as a therapist right now in the best, like at the highest level, right? So I need to deal with my eye. So I feel my eye, and I feel that together with emptiness, and then the eye collapses, and then there's dancing and flowing again, and then I can serve you better. So that's like one phase of it, and then it just becomes an obvious contrast between what's happening here, because after a while there's no need to look for I, or you'll notice when that inquiry is needed, because you'll feel stuck, like stuckage, stoppage. Oh, there's an I there. If that stoppage isn't there, then there's no question. Like the question doesn't even, you're not going to be asking yourself forever, is there an I here? It's not going to be needed. It'll just be contrast between lack of suffering and suffering, or the tiniest suffering and suffering, more suffering, or the tiniest suffering and complete freedom. And through those contrasts, you'll navigate. I mean, there's plenty of times when I have felt like there's no I. And then I look again, and there it is. The main focus of what we're offering is self-referral. So tuning into yourself, feeling what's happening within you. And the main focus isn't recognizing what someone else is, so much. It's not, the main focus of what we're doing is not saying that's yours. It's actually, the focus is on what's happening in me. But I also feel like it's important because of because if I'm focusing on what's happening in me, like if I'm having a conversation with Sarah and she's saying, I'm feeling grief, and then I'm feeling grief, if I'm then feeling that grief and feeling that's my grief, or that's mine, it gets really confusing. Like, what if we're not having that conversation and Sarah's just feeling grief, and I'm feeling grief in my body and I think it's mine, but I'm engaging with my partner? People who, have some savvy and relating and so on, is we go right into her, her experience. What's happening in Sarah right now? Oh my gosh, let's take care of Sarah by being inside Sarah and like tending to what's happening there, That's not bad. I mean, it creates a lot of comfort, and
Sometimes.
yeah, sometimes as a therapist. But there's really a lot to be said for referring to yourself, because when we dive into someone else, like whatever is happening here is just left out, totally excluded, when it could be informing the whole, and even it could be informing Sarah in a way that she didn't actually even realize she needed, And then it just happens to be this way where everyone starts to vibe together. When you're tuning into yourself, everyone starts to vibe together. I love it. So we're going to do, that's what we're doing. I'm about to say we're going to do more of that, but that's kind of what we're doing anyway. And the point is that we're doing that, learning to do that in relationship, because that's what creates It's what allows the freedom of being in relationship. So I was asking Daniel a couple of nights ago, I said, you know, I was stuck thing on this retreat and feeling a little stuck in it. Can you just share with me a little bit about how you experience our relationship so I can like tune into what we're doing, you know, on the retreat? And he said a lot of stuff, but one of the things he said I was so grateful for, he said, I felt the freedom to be myself, no matter what's arising. So I feel like that's because of the self-referral that we're cultivating. And the acceptance and allowance and surrender here brings acceptance and allowance and surrender of whatever someone else is offering up in their experience. So freedom in relationship, creativity, lack of stagnation. I feel like that's a big one, especially in partnership. I've experienced that a lot. And Daniel and I have even in the past month or so been like, what the fuck is this stagnation? And it's actually a stagnant sense of self that's sitting there and not like letting go into the flow, right? So when we're visiting a sense of self and that sense of self is allowed to return to the oneness of the oneness with silence, then it creates flow in our relationships.
I feel like there was something else, but I don't know what it was, so I'll stop there.
So I think what it boils down to for me is that through the exploration of identity, like what's me, what's someone else, there begins to be an experience of nobody there. I feel like you can relate with that.
Mm-hmm.
So when nobody's there, there is no one having an experience. And therefore, like over time, watching, oh, what's it like to have the experience of being nobody? What's it like to have the experience of being somebody? Just like balancing that and watching over time, it was like, oh, being nobody is lack of suffering. Being somebody equals suffering. And that suffering can get more and more subtle the more like love is cultivated and so on, but it's still there. And then the potential for that suffering shows up in the environment and in our relating, really. So the benefit of noticing what's me and what's other is to notice that there's an I there that has the potential for suffering. It's not about like, I don't have anger, that's Fleur's. It's about there's nobody here and yet there's anger. Continual anger. So the in my experience with Fleur, and this is related to my relationship with Fleur that I don't have with everybody. You know, I don't it's the way that it comes out with her because it's what she calls out of me for her benefit, like for our equal benefit. But she on a basic level of assumption is asking me, show me where I have I all the time. I want to see this I want to know where I'm suffering, and I want to be able to see it. So I show up for her like that, and that is kindness. But there's nobody here. And if there were someone here, if there were somebody saying, you know what, I'm not going to do that for you because that to me is not being kind, that would be okay. But then I wouldn't actually be able to show up in the way that is the greatest kindness for her. So in the experience of everything is mine, there's actually a subtle, like, reinforcement of a me there, you know, that eventually leads to suffering. And both Fleur and I are continually watching this in ourselves as we navigate life. You know, it's not like I can sit here and say, and I'm always nobody offering this thing to Fleur, and no, I have to watch too when an I arises in myself. And it's good for me to know that, because if I'm having an I arise, then I'm gonna show up to the people around me in separation. That's okay. Like, that's just part of navigating life, and that's part of getting into eventually the experience of no I and lack of suffering. But tasting the way of showing up for someone else without without a sense of I, that doesn't mean there's not uniqueness there, because there's still a unique being that's like flowing and expressing. If I show up like subtly clinging to something, I actually can't be in full service. What comes up for you? Yeah, the hot topic there is divine will versus personal will. So there's an I, right? What is it that's moving that I? And are they separate or together? So when, on a practical level, somebody says something to me, what moves me to respond? Like, what is that thing? What is that thing that's moving me? Is it, and where is it in relationship to my body? And what's my experience of self in relationship to it? It sounds like simple, but it's big. I mean, it's a big, like, that's one of the things you visit at every rung is will, divine will, personal will. And just, it's why coming back to the sense of self, and whether that sense of self is in unification or separation with emptiness in the physical sensations, is the foundation. Like, the answer to every way you address what's happening is you go back to the three elements, and you look at what's happening with the three elements now, because they're always going to show up different as you like go up the ladder, let's say. Even though you're doing the same thing, the arrangement of them shows, and the material that they bring shows up differently as you're evolving.